Hello, my friend, and welcome to this episode of A Call to Leadership. On this two-part series, we are diving into such an important topic of the social expectations, the ways that we feel as though we are in bondage to what others expect of us, how others create our own identity, how we can break free of that and truly live fully to communicate messages with meaning and to live our purpose. I've invited a friend, Gordon Melville, to help me unpack this. Can't wait for you to listen in. I'm Dr. Nate Salah, and this is A Call to Leadership. Dee, welcome.
Thanks, Nate, for having me.
You are an incredible person who's lived an incredible life, and your story must be told. The journey that many people face today, also the journey that some of us don't quite understand, and we need help to better understand some of the challenges we're facing through society. And for folks who are new to the conversation or trying to understand some of the foundational aspects of the trans world, I think it's a good place to start and just identify some baselines before we get into your story, which is incredible. What is a trans person?
That's a great question, Nate. What is a trans person?
What is a trans person? Because somebody is listening today, they saw the title of the show and they're interested. Okay, you know, there's so much media. There's so much going on. You see in Hollywood, kids are becoming trans kids. We call gender. Is it reassignment? I mean, I don't want to mess up any language.
Well, it's changing every day. You know, what's the political correct way to say it anymore? And it's hard to keep up. You know, it was 1984 when I moved to St. Louis to begin my journey. And think about it. Well, that was actually 86. It was 84 when I began my journey, but it was 86 when I moved to St. Louis. And back then, it was just called sex change. Well, how direct is that? You know, now it's called gender affirmation surgery, you know, because everything has to have a positive spin to it. And so it's, you know, we want to align how someone feels with what their outside is. And so that's what it is. It's gender identity disorder. Well, nobody wants to have a disorder. So, you know, a disease, we don't want to have anything where we feel uncomfortable. So we want to change the outside to meet how someone feels on the inside. And so therefore they're calling it gender affirmation surgery. And basically we're lying to our kids that we can make their outside line up to how they feel on the inside. That's my personal opinion, that we're lying to our kids that we can do that.
And when you say our kids, how old are these kids?
The last I heard, now we're fortunate here in the state of Missouri that they've passed the Missouri SAFE Act where nobody under 18 can have gender affirmation care. But in other states, I've heard they'll start as young as 5. Doing puberty blockers and anything. So at 13, obviously, is when they would start to keep them from going into puberty, where they'll get pubic hair or breast would start to grow or anything like that. I don't know when they would actually begin a surgery. I don't follow it that closely anymore. To when they would, you know, there was a show on the Learning Channel, you know, that was very distressing for me to watch, where the two surgeons were arguing over how to build this young man a vagina. And after the third surgery, I was like, yeah, I'm done. We really don't know what we're doing. We're practicing. That's what doctors are. They practice medicine. Mm-hmm. You know, we really don't know what we're doing. We're practicing medicine on our kids. And it's shameful. But that's the lie that we're selling, is you have this disorder, this feeling that you're not comfortable in your body, and therefore we're going to help you by changing your outside to line up with your inside.
It's so controversial. And is this what happened to you?
Yeah, it is. The rules were way different for me, fortunately, and I didn't have the internet to diagnose myself. You know, they love WebMD. You know, let's go out and see what's wrong with ourselves. You know, think about pre-internet days, the dark ages.
Oh, I remember.
um, you know, I moved twice before I graduated high school. And so I lost my foundation of my friendships. And, you know, I grew up as a tomboy, and I was very comfortable with that because my best friend was a tomboy. But then you move, and then you move again. And, you know, I moved from a farming community to a very affluent neighborhood. And my hair wasn't dyed blonde, and I didn't really fit in. And it was very uncomfortable in so many ways, and I was bullied and all those fun things that every teenager goes through. And I remember me reading the newspaper about a trans tennis player, and I was like, oh wow, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could have the, you know, change the outside of who you were. But what do you do with that? I was 16 years old. You know, I didn't have a supportive family. I didn't talk about it. I just remember thinking about it. And 16 is when I decided I'd commit suicide at 25.
Well, hold on a second there. That's
yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Well, yeah. And when you say you didn't have a supportive family, to what extent?
Well, to every extent. I mean, I got up, got myself ready for school I don't ever remember a mom that got me ready for school. I don't ever remember being put to bed at night. I remember being told to go to bed, but I don't ever remember being hugged, being told that I was loved. I don't, you know, at once in the last couple of years, I named myself the inconvenient child. I had 2 older brothers my mom adored, but she didn't have time for a girl. My grandfather lived on a farm, which I later found out we owned the livestock that was on the farm. And I didn't even know that, but I had to keep up with my brothers and everything we did on the farm, you know, so I was treated like a boy. And so somewhere in my young age, I just thought it'd be a great idea if I was a boy, I might get treated as an equal. Not that my mom got up and got the boys ready for school, but she was their Cub Scout leader. She was at their games. She was very involved in their lives, where I was just an afterthought. But
so did that have an impact on your desire to please?
I think there was a lot of influences on my desire to be a boy. I always say if the boys did something wrong, it was blamed on me. I learned very early on to just take the blame. The punishment was less. So am I saying I got beat? Yes, I'm saying I got beat. Yeah. My dad was a workaholic. He was not home. I remember in my early 20s, mom saying I was the apple of dad's eye, and I'm like, wow, that was news to me.
Like how many years had to go by, right?
Yeah, I don't ever remember dad having an interest in me, and that's what's so fascinating now when you look at like daddy-daughter dances, and so fun that they have all these creative ways for dads to show their love to their daughters. And I'm so excited to see those kind of things and how our world has changed to where, you know, if you're not raised in a healthy church environment, that there's ways for dads to pour into their girls because they need that affirmation from their dads. And I never got that. I mean, you know, stand on this moving trailer and hand out the poles for the electric fence. Come on, girl, don't fall down. You know, what are you doing? You know, I heard that, but, you know, I never heard, you know, you sure are beautiful. I never heard anything. You know, the kids, you know, you always ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And whatever I'd answer, I always heard, are you sure you're smart enough for that? So I never heard anything positive ever. And so there's just a point you wonder why you're alive. You know, why am I here?
And that was when you were 16.
At 16, you know, that was after the second move. There was no friendships ever that came out of that school. And so why I always look back and I'm like, what was the driving force that kept me alive then? Why did I decide, why didn't I kill myself then? Why did I decide to wait till 25? And fortunately, you know, I found Christ. You look back and you're like, oh, that was the hand of God that kept me alive, because I didn't find Christ before 25. But you can just look back and I think anybody that is a Christian, you can look back and say, wow, that was God. And, you know, and I think it's interesting to think, why did I pick 25? And I remember my mindset being, I'll have seen everything and done everything there is to do in the world by 25. And so untrue, you know, to be an old lady now.
Right.
Going, there's still so much more I want to experience. And
so when you were on this journey, this early journey, and you felt, I suspect, isolated in some ways from the love of your family, and really the friend group at that age, very formidable age, and isolated. And I really believe that isolation is one of the vices of that dark road that leads to a lack of purpose, a lack of meaning, a lack of really any possibility for progress in life. Mm-hmm. Because as human beings, we are communal creatures. We are creatures who desire to have a connection, first with our family, and then with our peer group. Of course, in your case, you were able to find that connection with your faith in your mid-20s. And likewise, I had a very similar time frame of that. During that time, that formidable time, that teenage time, when you began to question, I suppose, identity in some ways, yes. What were some of the things that were going on in your mind?
It was survival.
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to do was survive the day. I mean, this was when I laugh because my parents gave me a car. I mean, I think, you know, the one things they did was they provided I had shelter, I had clothing, you know, and so I was given a car at 16. And so now I've got a way to get around. And so now I've got friends that just wanted a ride that provided alcohol. And so I started numbing to survive. And so there was no real living. It was survival. And even if I had my high school notebooks, because my grades began to plummet. And my dad was telling me how stupid I was, so nobody expected me to apply myself. And my notebooks, I doodled at them, help me. You know, I wanted somebody to help me. I laugh at my high school counselor, who basically was telling my mom there was no point in me going to college. I mean, nobody believed in me. And so I'm still amazed. I graduated from high school, barely. And it truly, I'm amazed I'm sitting here with you, Nate. I truly am. And in the back of my mind is like this growing fantasy to become male. It's growing. And how much better would my life be if I was male? This is starting to grow, but because I read an article in a sports page, and now somebody's saying, what are you going to do after high school? But nobody's giving me any direction. And it's crazy because I pick a technical school out in Denver just to get away from home. And because nobody's giving me direction, nobody points me to a community college I didn't even know existed. So I ended up out in Denver, actually dated a guy out in Denver because he was just safe. He was just happy to have somebody to do something with as well. But I ultimately got expelled because of my attitude. Imagine that.
No surprise.
Yeah, no surprise. Exactly. I didn't know how to communicate. And so when the going got tough, a rebellious teenager came out. And so I ended up back with my parents' house. And I did end up graduating with an X-ray degree out of, it's a hospital-based program is what I went to. And then ended up in a small town outside of Des Moines. And, you know, it's really God's favor that happened, you know. But at this point in time, my drinking was just so out of hand.
Were you in your 20s yet? You still a teenager?
Yeah, I was 21
Yeah.
at this point. And
so just self-medicating with the alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had a wonderful personality that everybody loved, and I worked 3 to 11 by myself, and everybody's covering for me, and I'm drinking on the job. And
what kind of work was it?
I was an X-ray tech.
You were a tech?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't stupidly drunk on the job, but I knew, and I had a conscience, and we worked call because it was a small hospital, and we could drink on the job when we were on call. And so the great thing is on a weekend I got called in and I had some chest pain going on. And so they hooked me up to the monitor just to see what was going on, and my heart had stopped while I was on the monitor. And so they called the doctor in that had come in to see the patient, and they had run the tape while we were in there. And he just looked at me and he said, "Dee, I don't know what you're doing." He said, "But if you want to get sober and you want to get cleaned up, call my office and I'll get you in. But if you don't, you'll be dead by the time you're 25. Now, I'm 22 at this point. Here's my goal. To be dead by the time I'm 25, and I'm well on the way. I don't have to go get a gun and hold it to my head. I'm accomplishing what I've set out to do in life, to be dead at 25."
Wow.
And so this is how serious my problem was. I wasn't an alcoholic, but my body is now completely addicted to alcohol just to numb and get my way through life. And, you know, obviously my heart had stopped back up. And we can say, you know, God's like knocking at my door going, "Hey, idiot, you can't keep doing this." So I ended up in rehab, obviously. I don't know why I wanted to be dead at 25. It's one of those great mysteries of life. You want to be dead at 25, just keep partying and having a good time and you'll get there.
But you ended up in rehab.
I ended up in rehab. And then for the first time in life, for the first time in my adult life, had to face life sober and see what life was really like. And
how did you feel?
I had to feel.
You had to feel. You probably you hadn't felt in some time.
I had not.
Yeah.
As an adult, I had not. And it put me in a place of having to cope, and I didn't like it. And it set me up for really having, I mean, now you got to understand, this desire to be male was really growing. And they made me change shifts at work. Imagine that, and you know, where I'd be accountable.
When you were, as you say that, one question comes to mind, and maybe a listener's asking the same question. What kind of, as far as your setting or your influences were I guess, stoking that flame of the desire to become male? Were there groups or at the time magazines or the internet,
No, I mean, you think about this, we're talking early 80s, and I'm in a small town, Iowa. I mean, no internet, no organized LGBT at all. I'm not sure if L and G were even organized. Yeah, there was definitely not a T. T was the last thing to be added because they needed the numbers.
Were you at that time still considered yourself heterosexual?
Yes, definitely. I was a bigot.
Oh.
My dad was very outspoken, and so I kind of, that's kind of one of the things I think you inherit when you're raised in that environment. And so I can still remember the first lesbian couple I met. I played softball with them. And I remember even the first black person I met when I was in Denver, thinking, what's my dad's problem? And that was one I was like, he's an idiot. But, and so it was after I sobered up that I met this woman, and she had advances towards me, and I really did not want this. I did not. And it was a difficult, hard time for me. And we'll just say that as she began to care more and more for me, my defenses went down because I'd never had anybody care for me. And I'm not going to make excuses for myself. But it, if you've ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages, mine are quality, touch, and time. And that's 2 things my family never gave me. And these are 2 things this woman gave me. And I remember distinctly the day the switch flipped, is what I say. Because I'd been terribly ill, and she spent the night with me, and nothing happened because I was that ill. But I remember the next morning going, what is my problem? Nobody's ever cared for me, whether I woke up the next day or not. And then here she is. And I don't understand why I'm fighting this so hard. And I did not tell her that I wanted to be male. I just began to let her pursue me and not fight off her advances. And it was probably about 3 or 4 months later before I told her my secret of wanting to become male.
How did that go?
Well, that was an interesting conversation because, I'm not exactly acting like an adult yet. And like today, you'd be celebrated to tell somebody you wanted to be the other sex. Back then, it wasn't even heard of. So we had gone on a cruise together, and it was on the cruise that I realized how I really felt towards her, how I really wanted to be in this relationship. And when we got back from the cruise is when I said, I want to become a man. And if I do this, I want us to be married. And so in less than 2 minutes, I said, I want to be a man. Let's get married. And she said, okay. And okay. And then we found a foundation. I found a foundation and wrote off on how to proceed with doing this, and, waiting for snail mail to get back to me on how to do this, and was sent a packet of information and with a list of physicians that would help me. And that's when we picked up and moved down here to St. Louis without verifying any of the information. I mean, that's how young and stupid I was. But again, I think the hand of God. Came down here to St. Louis in 1986. It was the rules back then where you had to present as 2 years as what you wanted to become. So being female, I had to live as a man for 2 years before I'd even get hormones.
So how is that played out? How do you live like a man? Being a man,
Yeah, I dress like a man.
Just
and
like
I
a-
talk that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, is it just that?
It's just that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in everyday life, I just, I began going by J.D. Miller, and put on a suit and tie for work, and tried to work with a physician to get hormones. And so the whole operation at that point in time had been shut down because Johns Hopkins had quit doing it. There was a man by the name of Cy Rogers that had taken on the establishment. Johns Hopkins had done their own research, had found out that there was nobody was getting anything. There was not. They were doing these surgeries and there was no positive outcomes. And so they were like, yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. And Johns Hopkins never has since. And so that was the trickle down effect that I got caught in the backwash of that. And so here in the Midwest, that happened. Now, I know people that were on the coast that, still. But for me, I mean, I'm so grateful. After 2 years, I still wasn't getting hormones. After 3 years, I still wasn't getting hormones. 4 years, I still wasn't getting hormones. But I was living as a man. And so my girlfriend at this point's like, yeah, this isn't going to happen. She moved back to Iowa, but we continued a long distance relationship. And meanwhile, what I didn't mention is she was a church-going person in Iowa. In her frustration here, she was like, hey, I want to go back to church. And I'm like, I never stopped you. And if you want, I'll go with you. And she was like, no, I don't want you to go to church with me. And it was on a Sunday that she told me she was moving back to Iowa. So in my brilliant mind, I thought, I'll go to church and get her to go with me, or get her to come back to me. If I go to church, that'll restore our relationship. I always think it's interesting how God pursues us and the crazy thoughts that go through our mind. But her God didn't scare me. What's the scripture? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Proverbs 1:7.
Yeah, I had no fear of God. I had no fear of her God. I didn't see an issue with this. And so I went to a coworker that I knew was a Christian. And she was like, oh, I'm greeting this Sunday. Come to this door. My husband's an usher. I'll take you to the usher's room. He'll take you to our reserved seats. And I always think God has a sense of humor because I ended up on the front row in service that day. So,
what were when you were? This is a good turning point for our conversation. You're in the front row.
Mm-hmm.
What was your intention?
Just to get her back. I didn't see a need for God. I didn't. I actually. I never believed he existed. Because of knowing I had such a terrible childhood, a rough childhood, my thought was if he existed, I would not have had such evil in my life.